Michael with United Veterans Worldwide for an exciting interview today with Kenzie and Branden. Kenzie and I met many years ago when she was a teenager at Fort Riley, Kansas, where her father was serving in the Army, and I knew her to be a bright, intelligent girl. My wife worked in her youth group at church, and we had fond memories, and I'm excited today to introduce both of them to you. Kenzie runs an Instagram channel called The Cozy Homestead. I'll link it in the description below, where she takes her followers through living a life of joy, doing things within the home, for food, for decorating. She's very gifted and talented, and Branden is a former Marine who did 8 years in the service. He served his 2-year mission in South Africa and had his own deployment experiences there, and just so eager for you to hear from them today. And so I'll turn the time over to Kenzie to talk through her story of being a military child and growing up in the military.
Hearing the revelry, on base, and just all of my childhood memories revolve around the military and patriotism. And then, of course, the war. I was in middle school when the Twin Towers were attacked, and that changed my whole life after that moment, So, yeah, it was, I wouldn't change it for the world.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that it was easy by any means, but I think I had a big change of heart my junior year of high school when we got stationed in South Korea. So I don't know if you want me to get into that right now.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, so we moved, let's see, I loved Kansas where we met. Fort Riley was my favorite station that we ever lived at. I just feel like I had the best friends there. I really loved Kansas. And I loved high school. Like you said, I love to be involved in a lot of things. And I remember vividly, my dad came home and told me that for my junior and senior year, we would be going to Korea. And instantly my heart just shattered. All of everything that high school should be shattered in that moment. And I was mad. I never really been mad up to that point. I knew it was just life. We just moved. That's what we did. You couldn't get mad about it. That's what the Army tells you to do. You do it. But I was mad, and I was a stinker for quite a while. I remember crying on the airplane and crying in the airport and crying all the way to our home. And everything was just so different. Everything. The smells, the sights, everything. I mean, nothing was familiar to me.
A cultural shock.
It truly was, yes.
Yeah.
And I remember actually, luckily we lived in a smaller little ville. They called it a ville, right outside of base, because the base that we were stationed to was so tiny at the point that there were only 3 buildings that could accommodate for families at the time. And so most people had to live off base, like in the villas. And so we had a rice paddy in our backyard. But from my school bus stop to my house, I walked, it was like a mile or so every day. There was a little farm of cows, and it was the only thing that reminded me of home. And so every day I would go hang out with cows. I'm not kidding. And it just brought me peace. And I'm not sure exactly, I think it was with the cows, actually. At one time I was just kind of sitting there, and I just had the thought, you could either make the most of this, or you can just suffer for 2 years. And in that moment, I was like, okay, we're going to have fun here.
Yeah.
And for some reason, from that moment on, I just had this deep appreciation for everything I was learning there, everything I was facing, for the military, for everything that my dad chose to do for our family. So, yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the rundown.
And while you were there, were you able to make friends with locals? And
Yeah, I wouldn't say a lot of locals per se, because our base we were kind of a tight-knit little community there. And I went to high school on a different base because our base was so tiny, so I was bused an hour each way to school, to an Air Force base. And so, that was kind of our community. But yeah, we definitely did make friends with some locals, like church members and things like that. So
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And my mom was the stake Young Women's president while we were there. So.
Well, what an experience. I think that my daughter, if she were to be on this channel with us today, she's serving in Africa on her mission right now too. She's in Malawi, and I remember when she was 15, maybe she was 14 or 15, and I told her that we were moving from where we were living at the time, I think was Texas, and we were moving to Georgia. And I tell you, I was hated in my house. And I wasn't nice about it either. I think I probably just said, deal with it. Like, we're just moving again. And at that age was not just a deal with it. It was drastic and
it's life shattering.
Yeah. Well, and she reminds me of that today. She's like, Dad, you were not sensitive to what I was feeling. And I was like, I'm so sorry. Forgive me, So I can understand that. And I lived as a child in many different countries. My dad was an Air Force intel guy, and so we lived in Italy, Greece, and Germany growing up. And so we moved from one culture to the next, to another language, is all different. But there was something special about it too that gave me a bigger sense of the world around me. And I think it really carried with me throughout my military career and into what I'm doing now for this channel, which is looking at a global audience and saying, at the end of the day, we all go to work, we have families, we're trying to survive, we're trying to be healthy. Let's bring the world into this picture and try to find some commonality. And I love that story. You mentioned that you loved your time at Fort Riley. I didn't love my time at Fort Riley.
That's funny.
I was a brand new lieutenant. And to be fair, I didn't know enough. And I was with people who had already been combat soldiers previously, and I was walking into the fire, and they let me know it, and rightfully so. You don't want someone to lead you that's inexperienced, and that was the struggle. And I had to learn really, really quickly, and part of that was suffering. I had to learn how to suffer, and then ended up serving me better later on. But Riley was a tough time for me. But I know that my wife definitely enjoyed being around you and working with you before you had to move. So that's a treasure. That's great.
Definitely. Yeah.
So Branden, tell me about your experience prior to meeting Kenzie. Prior to your mission, you joined the military. You came back after your mission, which you were in a great mission, by the way. My daughter went down there and did her missionary training center in South Africa.
In Johannesburg.
Yeah, in Joburg. Yeah, and she loved it.
Yeah. It was, the whole experience was pretty awful and it sucked, to be honest. But it not for the reasons that most people think, is because I was lonely.
Yeah.
I didn't have any support. There was no members. In the Marine Corps, it's almost like if you don't drink, you're an outcast.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't smoke, you're an outcast. If you don't sleep around, you're an outcast.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't swear, you're an outcast.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 4 strikes against me.
Mm-hmm.
And all I ever wanted to do was just be a Marine, ever since I was a kid. And I wanted to serve my God, my country, my family for my life.
Yeah.
And so I know I would serve my God for my mission, my family for the rest of my life, but I wanted to serve my country. And it was just miserable.
Mm-hmm.
It was so bad because I would do my duties, and it wasn't the working part, it wasn't the PT, it wasn't the training or anything else. I mean, you can ask anyone who knows me, I don't shy from any of that, and that's completely fine.
Yeah.
You just smile through it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was when you needed a friend, or you needed someone to have your back, or when you needed to not be alone and not be a cast out. I mean, to get your food, just put it in perspective, get your food and you kind of go to eat, and there's no one to eat with you, because they look at you as you're trying to portray yourself as better than them.
Yep.
Or something like that. And
yep.
I know it varies from branch to branch, but in the Marine Corps and the units I was in, it was very, very ruthless when it came to that.
Yeah.
And so I just held true to what I knew would bring me the more long-term or eternal happiness, I just held true.
Yeah.
It ended up at the very, very, very end being worth it, because every single one of the Marines who ever gave me a hard time or who would single me out and everything else, every one of them came up to me and they would be like, dude, why? Like, why are you different? Why do you do this? And, I have all these problems. You seem like you don't have any. Or why is your life, it just feels different, and I want to know why. So I had a ton of missionary opportunities and spiritual experiences before my mission and after my mission, especially after, because I was a little bit more prepared. But it was interesting. I didn't get that to almost the very end of like my 8th year, because even when I went on my mission, I had people calling me a coward for going and serving. And so, I mean, when you talk about like, I'm kind of censoring it for the channel, ruthless. I mean, it was at every turn that they could have. But, I know I wanted to be a Marine. I wanted to do every single thing that I was supposed to do for them, and to serve in every way that I could.
Yeah.
And I did. And it was awesome. And it was kind of funny. I got promoted ahead of time before my mission. And when I went on my mission, my paperwork, for the sake of not saying things, there were certain things that happened with the person who was over the paperwork. And while I was gone, I was actually supposed to get promoted through, because I had all my testing done. I had all of my MCIs back at the time done and everything. What happened is I actually got demoted, because none of that got processed. So I came back to my unit, and I was like, oh man, this is going to be sweet. I'm going to be a sergeant when I come back. And then they're like, oh no, you're actually back to Lance Corporal. So everyone else in my unit who was around my age, they'd actually advanced up. So then I spent the next 2 years getting promoted ahead of time meritoriously to not only catch back up to them, but then surpass.
What a blessing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so grateful that you have shared that experience with us, because I have interviewed people who loved every moment, and I've interviewed people who hated a lot of it. And when I'm asked the question, what was it like when you served? I have to be honest. I would say there were bad times, and then there were good times. And I hold to those good times, and I put my plaques on the wall, and I put my coins on the wall, and I hold to the good times. But there were plenty of rough times. My first job as a lieutenant, I remember going into my commander's office. I was getting my platoon that day, and he said, hey, my advice, take all of your senior NCOs out for drinks tonight. And I was like, I don't drink alcohol. And he's like, you're going to fail miserably in your platoon. And I was like, great. Now I'm going to fail. I was like, that's terrible. Well, I didn't fail. Because it's not about drinking. If they rely on that to get through whatever they got to get through, I do it a different way. And by the time I left my platoon, right before we went to Iraq, I served as a battle captain. The best compliment I got from my platoon is they said, you have been our moral compass for this last year in training up for Iraq. And I was very grateful for that. But in the meantime, there was also a lot of suffering in there where people were hating on the fact that I wasn't out doing those same things. So I can relate to you, Branden. That's tough. And as far as being alone, and you know this now more than ever, is that you never were alone. Even if we weren't side by side, of course we supported you and we were with you, and our prayers were with you in your struggles as well. It always was. So.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
But but it was funny because my mom, because they had called me up, I was one of the ones selected, and my mom went into my unit and talked to my commanding officer, and she was just like, we had a deal.
Yep.
He has fulfilled his deal with every single dot, every single T.
So his mom had to play a big part in this because he was 17 when he joined.
Yeah.
So I just feel like I should include that. Like, instead of after-school sports, from freshman on, as soon as he was from school, he would go to the Marine recruiting office and work out with the Marines. Like, that was his life.
Yeah.
And so his mom was very, very involved, making sure his boy was taken care of.
Yeah, she was pretty
Mama
awesome.
Bear, for sure.
And that was part of that deal that I was mentioning earlier. She's like, I will sign when you're 17, because she had to co-sign, but you'll serve a mission. And at that time, I was just like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. Just let me sign up, just let me train. And yeah, for 4 years, she stood by my side, and she went over everything Marine Corps. I mean, I knew all the history. I would say 99.9% of things before going into boot camp. And so those, like, holding on to those wins, right?
Yeah.
Going in and having, obviously, your parents' support and everything. Those were always good things to hold on to. But yeah, so because we were able to, I guess, have all that pre-training and everything else like that, it just helped me consistently throughout the whole career I was in.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. Well, if the audience doesn't know what South Africa's like, that was a deployment.
Yes.
I saw, and I kid you not, towards the end of, I won't talk forever on this and everything, but we were robbed every week.
Oh, I'm sure.
And so I saw people get beat to death. I saw people get hacked apart alive, burned in tires, their heads blown off right in front of us. So, I mean, just really gruesome, gruel things with blood and gore.
Yeah.
And it's funny, when those Marines came back from their deployment, we would talk, and it's like, well, what'd you do? They're like, well, we sat in the tent. We didn't really do anything. They're like, what about Africa? I was like, I saw 10 times more.
Yeah.
Than you ever did.
Yeah. Yeah, there's the stories I've heard that come out of South Africa have been wild.
Well, and he wasn't in the nice parts of South Africa. We talked to people from South Africa, and he mentioned the parts, and their eyes go wide. Like, you were what? You were where?
Because we tried opening up certain areas from our mission president and stuff, and then they actually got a Royal Marine, and then me, the United States Marine, together, and we opened up areas.
No kidding.
It was just so rough, and then we would come back and we would report. As soon as the sun would come down, usually, for those who don't know, when you're on your mission, you work till like 9 o'clock at night. But it would be about 4:30 and the sun would start to come down, coming or whatever, and we'd have to leave immediately. And so the areas were extremely rough. I mean, fights all the time. And there's a lot of areas where men would beat the women.
Yeah.
And then we would intervene, and then we would be emergency transferred out. So there's just certain things that, in my opinion, it doesn't matter who you are, what's right is right. You got to stand for that. And so we were able to have a lot of those opportunities while we were there, and being pre-trained for that to handle those situations.
Yeah.
It was a huge blessing.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. I'm so glad you shared that with us. I spent a lot of time in Africa when I was with Civil Affairs and the Special Operations side of the house, and Africa was my area of focus, East Africa, and yeah, talk about a different world. Things aren't normal, but I also found some great people that just changed my life, I think, from those experiences. But yeah, that's incredible. You talk about doing what's right and standing up for what's right. I mentioned the other day in an interview that it's hard for us to become the people that we're supposed to be, the leaders we're supposed to be in our homes or in the community, if we don't go through fire on our own. And I said it's never fun to go through the fire, because it's a testing, it's a purifying part of life that's often requires sacrifice, and obviously that your experiences in the Corps were part of that purifying fire. Your experiences in South Africa as well, and I can only speak to what I've seen from Kenzie's stuff on her page, but you're a united family, and you're standing up for what you know to be right all the time, and it's honorable to see that and to hear those messages. So thank you guys for that. As we get close to the end here of this interview today and this discussion together, I'm so grateful for the lives that you both have lived. there's a light about you. You can tell that you both were put together for a reason to do good things and to make good changes in the world. So this last 2 minutes, what advice could you give my global audience that's listening today when it comes to accomplishing hard things, going through struggle, and making it on the other side, finding light?
That's a really good question. I think to just have hope. I think that would be my answer. There is always a reason for hope. The night always turns to morning. We lost a son, actually, and that was a devastating part of our lives. But looking back, I mean, it's still very, very difficult. It will be for the rest of our lives, but there's always reason for hope, and that is what got us through those times. It's what's gotten us through every time. Something to look forward to, and sometimes it might not seem like there is, but there always is.
Yeah. I would echo that by saying just don't give up. And giving up doesn't mean always moving. It just means just don't sit down and quit. If you're standing and if you can't move, just keep standing. Stand for another minute. Try to eventually slowly move, because any type of move of progression through that fire is progression. And I think a lot of people don't give themselves credit for going through a really hard day and not understanding that most people probably couldn't, and that they need to have that empathy for themselves. And that love for themselves of, man, I went through something today. Didn't progress very much, but I still progressed a little bit.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Thank you both for your time today. Thank you very much for the work that you guys are doing, spreading goodness around, and I look forward to connecting in the future. So you guys have an enjoyable Sunday evening.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Bye. Thank you.